Hello there and welcome to, well, a finished product. It feels a little strange to flip it around on its head and say it this way, but there at last, the Death Guard army is complete. So this is the army that the army painter very kindly agreed to sponsor and let me assemble here, and it's finished. Now, this I had said I was going to paint in 30 days. I know it's the 3rd of October now when this goes up, but the actual painting time on these, and I have receipts, was 25 days. Not even the full 30, and this is what I've got here. 3,000 points of Death Guard. Now, I'm quite happy with the result there, but I want to talk you through a couple of the things that I kind of discovered along the way, or either confirmed for myself, because, to quote one of the great minds of our time, Dear Princess Celestia, I didn't learn anything. I was right all along. And that was definitely true of one or two of the things going into this project. But I did surprise myself along the way. So if you don't want to paint Death Guard, maybe you want another Legion on the table, I do have a couple of thoughts on that as well that I'll share with you as we go. So the photos here are unedited. There's going to be a little bit of variation in the white balance. That's just the nature of trying to get a complete army in shot at any one time. So yeah, quick note on the army composition itself. I went into this completely blind. I had not played Horus Heresy 1st, 2nd, or indeed now 3rd edition. The idea was to come in and basically build a vibes-based Death Guard army. So when I had in mind a vision for the Force, it was more about thinking, well, what do the Death Guard do? What do they specialize in? Now, I wanted to stick to plastic kits as much as possible, reason being that they're a little easier to get your hands on, generally speaking. They are the ones that are in stock more often than not, and I didn't want to go through any special characters or what have you. I wanted this to be my army. So I was quite lucky in the end that once I had assembled and built everything, and I got my hands on the actual rules for Horus Heresy 3rd edition, I was able to build an army out of what you see in front of me here. And lucky me, it actually might work. So like I said, going in blind, I'm not 100% certain about the performance of this army. Just from experience with other games that I've played, I think this is going to be an incredibly tough army. It's going to take a fair pummeling, but I don't know necessarily that it's going to put out as much hurt as it should. If there's anything that this army is lacking, it's close combat ability. The Terminators with the chain fists and a couple of other bits and pieces, they're going to hit hard if they make it into combat, but I think that is a weak link in this army's composition. So right in the center there, with all of the officers and that big 20-man tactical squad, you can see that is the Crusade detachment. That's the core of the army. All of those officers aren't going to show up at once on the table. So the fellas at the front here, hooray, picture change. The fellas at the front here are mostly to give me some options in how I build my army, or if I want to play smaller games. So left to right, we've got the Opti, the Centurion and Terminator armor, the Saturnine Praetor, which is pretty cool, the regular Praetor, the Centurion in the Mark II armor, which is probably my favorite miniature in the army, and then a chaplain that I had painted a couple of years ago. And he fits in well enough with the army, I just got to repaint that base rim. Now the thought here is because officers unlock detachments that you can then build the rest of your army with, I wanted a few options so that I was not going to be hamstrung by my choices, and I had some cheaper options, so even if I don't want to take the Praetors, I can still build an army. The Centurions there with the Terminator armor and the Mark II armor, they're probably going to be the ones that see the table most often. The Opti is there mostly, he's 50 points with a couple of weapons upgrades. He's there if I desperately need an extra unlock. As well, a Power Maul is just a cool little toy to have on the table. And yeah, I'm quite happy with how they look. In particular, the Praetor in the Saturnine armor, I got to admit, assembling the Saturnine Terminators was a lesson in pain, but they're cool once they're finished, and the paint job was a lot of fun. The only thing I actually struggled with these guys, and the other Terminators too, and we see those later, was where to stick the chapter badges, sorry, the Legion badges, because none of them quite fit the shape of those big goofy pauldrons. So yeah, that was a fun one. These guys, the core of the officer cadre here, they give me some options for how to build the army. So over on the left-hand side here is where the army really comes together, and where I actually got quite lucky in how Death Guard are able to build their armies, because they have access to a special detachment called the Reaping Host. Now that's 2 tactical options, and one of them is a prime unit, which is important because that can be used with the unlockability logistical benefit to give you a random slot, essentially. We'll talk about that in a second. So I've got there the tactical squads. The Terminator unit is another one native to the Reaping Host, and so is a support unit, which on this side is the quad cannons. Now, people gave me a lot of stick. They were saying, oh, you're going to play Death Guard and take quad cannons. Well, yeah, why should I artificially restrict what I can take because, oh, it might be too good? I don't want to build a really cheesy army, but I do want to take something which fits the character of the Death Guard. And yeah, that means great big walloping artillery pieces. Now the cool thing with the prime slot, so the tactical squad up there in the front, is being able to unlock the logistical benefit. I can take the extra dreadnought. And that's how I've built both of these Reaping Host detachments. Essentially identical with the tactical squad, Terminator squad, a support unit, and then a dreadnought. Now I want to get a slightly closer look at the artillery here because I really like how they came out. Funky little things. I actually really enjoyed assembling them once I got my mojo going for how those tiny wee tracks are supposed to fit. You can just clip them out and assemble them all in one go. The painting on the artillery crew is probably, if I have to say, they're probably the weakest painting because there are a few bits. You can't see them from here, and you'll never see them on the table, but there are a few bits that aren't painted, like just undercoated and then the dip, and wink, don't look too closely. I'm not going to show you what they are, because that's kind of the point of how this army is painted. But with that Reaping Host in mind, we'll jump on over to the other side of the army, and again, you can see there's the tactical squad out the front, in the prime slot, with the logistical benefit unlocked for the dreadnought lurking in the back there. We've got then the 10-man Terminator unit. If I had built the army around maybe a Spartan or something, a transport tank, I might have given these guys the lightning claws, but I love combi bolters. I love weight of firepower. So it's all power fists. There's a couple of chain fists in there. And then the support choice for this detachment is the apothecary. So it's nice and simple, and they're going to pretty effectively murder anything they come across. Slightly closer look at the Terminators there. I actually quite enjoyed painting these guys, and to their credit, these are a lot easier to stick together than the actual Tactical Marines turned out to be. Slightly older plastic sculpt for the Horus Heresy, and you do see it up close, but again, this is more about spectacle. Then to the rear here, we have a heavy support detachment, and that is in the form of the 10-man las cannon team, and then the 5-man Volkite Culverins. They're just very cool. I love those goofy looking weapons. I had no idea when I assembled them what they actually did, but it didn't bother me in the least. I just wanted guys with underslung weapons because it looks so cool. Polishing off the choices is the Saturnine Dreadnought lurking in the background there. You've seen that on the channel. That was a blast to paint, and it really makes for a great centerpiece. I think that one does stand out on the table. So a quick look, I'm going to jaunt back to the 20-man tactical squad and give you a look at kind of an army shot here, because I think up close, here's where the key of the army comes together, the method of the painting. You can see individually they aren't terribly well painted. Now, I don't mean to be needlessly self-deprecating and say, oh my gosh, they're rubbish, because they're not, but it is simply primed, base coats in the right place, and then the dip. The only things that kind of finish these guys off, first of all, is the decals. If you've got access to them, add them to your miniatures because they add a ton. They do so much heavy lifting. Then for the Death Guard, I've chosen the armor chipping and the rust for two reasons. One, the chipping kind of does some of the highlighting, quote unquote, for me. Once I've got a little bit of texture on the miniature, I don't need to come in and painstakingly highlight everything. And on the basic infantry here, you might even see that I haven't even highlighted the gold. The most highlights these guys have is when I came back with a little bit of plate mail metal. I dry brushed all of the black and silver just to add a bit of texture there. It works. You know, they're fine on the table. And certainly, I think the big mob really helps sell the army effect. You know, individually, they aren't a huge investment of time and effort, but the army looks cool, and I'm really happy with that result. There are one or two little additional things I want to do. You know, maybe dry brushing the leather on the holsters and that sort of thing. And the bristles, well, the crests, I should say, they always bristles in my head on the sergeants. I do want to do a little bit of highlighting there, but that's more for me. You know, I don't think you'll see it on the table. So panning back to the army shot, and here's where I want to talk through what I did learn and why I decided to go with the dip rather than something like a quick shade wash or marine juice or something like that. When you see these guys up close, and I'm going to briefly pop up here one of the vanity shots from the project, you can see that the way the dip itself, as it cures and dries, it peels back a little bit from the edges of detail, kind of like how contrast or speed paint, that sort of thing does. What it means is, once I've got my base coats on, for most of the army, like I said, it's dip and done. Now, if I were painting something like Imperial Fists or Iron Hands or something like that, I would do it in much the same way, but rather than adding all of this chipping and really griming them up, I would probably highlight them traditionally. I did discover that actually going in and adding all the rust and the chipping probably took about as much time overall as it would do to do some very basic highlights on a Marine. So it didn't save me a huge amount of time overall using the dip because I decided to essentially invest that in how I was finishing off the miniatures. And I think, yeah, they're really cool. I keep coming back to it. I love how they look. So as well as giving a very specific texture and finish to the miniatures, if you were to come back and, like, even if I hadn't done the chipping and the rust, I think this would still be a fine-looking army. The extra work definitely elevates it a little, but if you were to base coat and dip any legion, you'd be fine. You'd have an army that you could put on the table and be happy with. I think picking the right base also sort of really does change out what you're doing. I think I went for an irradiated, grubby ground sort of thing, and you see it fits the gaming mat that I've got quite nicely. But as well, it's an opportunity, if you are painting an army with a fairly limited palette, like the Death Guard here, I can add a little bit of warmth, which doesn't have to be on the miniature, so it's not as dull or bland to look at. For comparison's sake, here's one of the Marines that I had painted a while back on the channel, where the base is finished in that style, but there's no chipping or what have you. And you can see, again, just the base adds plenty. So if you've ever got it in mind that you want to do a large army very quickly, I do think the way that the dip finishes off the miniatures and comes away from those high points as it dries is really going to, it is worth using over something like, instead of something like an acrylic wash, because it is a little bit of extra investment in time. You do have to plan for it to dry and cure before you can varnish these guys. But I think the finish that you can see there speaks for itself. So yeah, that is the army, painted in 25 days, not 30, and I'm really proud of it. I want to say again thank you to the Army Painter team, specifically Tyler for giving me the idea in the first place. Adam for his support and letting me go ahead with this. It's really been the capstone, like I said at the start of the project, on a pretty weird couple of months. Not a great time for me, but now I've got something I can look back on and say, man, I am happy to have done that. I have to admit, when it came to the batch painting and doing this in large sections at a time, I probably wouldn't paint, 60 odd miniatures all in one go again. I would take the time, break this down into smaller lots and maybe 20 or so guys at a time so that I've got a more regular win to look forward to. Anyhow, I have rambled on at length about this enough. If you do have any questions still about the process or what I might do differently for other legions, sure, drop them in the comment box and I will try and answer as many as I can. This was a blast. Thank you again to the Army Painter. If you've enjoyed watching this come together or just been interested in how it's worked, let me know. I've really enjoyed it and I'm proud of this result. So thank you folks for sticking around, and we're going to paint something now that hasn't got any bloody power armor.